Joining us from New York to discuss the latest HRW report is Lewis Mudge, Central Africa Director of Human Rights Watch. Now, thanks for joining us, Lewis.
Thank you for having me.
All right. The HRW report statement issued today has stated that judicial authorities in Rwanda are prosecuting opposition members, journalists, and commentators on the basis of their speech and opinions. Tell us how how widespread this is in that country.
Sure. What we've continued to document in Rwanda, and in particular in 2021 and 2020, is that the space for both political opponents, but also for any type of commentator who wants to challenge the government, whether it be government policies or government programs, we're finding the space for that expression to be continuingly diminished. We saw this 10 to 12 years ago in the print media. A number of years after, we saw the restrictions in the radio. And now we're seeing this move online. We're seeing people who take to YouTube to offer commentary on government programs and policy. We're seeing them persecuted in the courts. We're also seeing political opponents who are trying to gather online to conduct meetings, Zoom meetings and the like. We're seeing them also be charged with state security crimes and face lengthy prison sentences. So we felt this report, as we're 2 years out from the presidential election, as the CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting, is going to be approaching in Kigali in just a few months, we decided to launch this report to remind Rwanda watchers and folks in East Africa and the broader region what is actually happening in Rwanda with regards to civil and political rights.
What impact would you say the threat and fear of prosecution for reporting on sensitive issues has on press freedom and free speech in Rwanda?
You have to look at the context of where Rwanda is. There's not the freedom for the media to do its job fully. If you want to report either positively on the government, or if you want to report on something that's completely neutral, then there is some space. But if you want to touch on the history of the genocide and the crimes that were committed by Paul Kagame's RPF, the party that's currently in power, who also committed crimes on the back end of the genocide in terms of targeting and revenge killings. If you want to talk about the fact that you've effectively had the same executive for almost 30 years in the country, if you want to talk about how there's no political space whatsoever for opposition, these are red lines. These are the lines that have been deemed too much to cross. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing these reporters and these commentators persecuted. The judiciary in Rwanda, in our opinion, at Human Rights Watch, is not independent. It is instead being used and manipulated in order to target people, to silence people, and to send a message to other journalists, to other commentators, that if you step out of line, you will go to court.
Pro-government, should I say pro-government voices would say these red lines have helped to keep the country stable. Would you agree with that assertion?
Look, I'd agree that Rwanda, out of any country, maybe in the world, but certainly in Africa, out of any country that has the right to want to limit and curtail hate speech, limit and curtail people who might incite other people to violence, especially ethnic violence, Rwanda absolutely has a right and an obligation to make sure that events that led up to the genocide in 1994 are not replicated. The problem is that they're taking that large context, and now they're using it to target anybody who challenges government programs or government policy. And that's where we say, no, this is a step too far. You're using a legitimate effort to limit hate speech, and now you're basically saying anyone who disagrees with the government is a genocide denier. Anyone who disagrees with government policy is spreading divisionism, or is a terrorist, or is trying to, encourage people to rise up against the state. The fact is that there needs to be space in which people can express themselves. This is a foundation, a principle of democracy, and it's a principle of human rights.
All right, the World Bank has said that the Rwandan economy is one of the most affected by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. due to its stringent lockdown measures. How has this affected Rwandans with respect to impoverishing them in terms of clampdowns and people accused of violating the public health measures?
We've done reporting on the clampdowns. Very much unfortunately, the clampdowns have really affected what are some of the region's poorest people. Rwanda, in terms of macroeconomic policy, has made huge steps. I know, I lived there for a number of years. I raised my first child there, and I was able to benefit from some of the macroeconomic advances that they made. But the fact is that the vast majority of Rwandans continue to be very, very poor. They live on $1 a day or less. And the clampdowns with regards to COVID-19 made it so that these people who often live day to day, who oftentimes do work in the informal sector, were not allowed to actually get out and perform these daily activities that enable them to survive. One of the reasons why we issued this report today is because some of the commentary that we've seen has been people criticizing a heavy-handed COVID-19 response by the government. And the response is not to either allow those people to voice that criticism or even have an inward-looking response and maybe change some of these policies. The response by the government overwhelmingly is to throw people who criticize the government's COVID-19 policies in prison.
All right, before I let you go, Rwanda is preparing to host the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Kigali in June later this year. The Rwandan president had earlier said it would be an important occasion to address key problems facing member countries. How do you think these cases of rights issues should be addressed even before the Commonwealth gathering?
Look, the human rights are, in theory, a principle of the Commonwealth. Respect for human rights is supposed to be adhered to by members of the Commonwealth. And while there'll be a vast array of issues discussed at the CHOGM meeting in Kigali in June, we think it would be disingenuous of Commonwealth members and disingenuous of the principles of the Commonwealth if they didn't address the fact that this meeting was happening in a very repressive society. The simple fact is that Rwandan media, local journalists, will not be able to issue any type of statements with regards to the actual meeting in Kigali if anything touches upon the actual situation in Rwanda. And that is a cruel irony that the Commonwealth countries should flag and should try to push Rwanda in a more positive direction on.
Thank you so very much, Lewis, for your time. We appreciate that.
Thank you.